Good afternoon, good morning, good evening for those of you who are in a different hemisphere. Welcome to our November Grammarly for Education webinar on driving instructional value with practical generative AI implementation. I am coming to you from Austin, Texas, as are our guests today. So hopefully you can enjoy some Texas sun. For those of you who are not in Texas, welcome all the same. Hope that you are enjoying the stretch run of first semester. And excited to have you all today to talk about a really interesting and relevant topic. Before we get into all of that, just our usual housekeeping items. Saw a lot of comments in the chat. Yes, this will be recorded. Everybody who has signed up and is attending live will receive a copy of that recording, as will anybody who was unable to make it. We are closing the chat once we get through these opening conversations just to prevent any kind of noisiness from happening, but you can always interact with us and the team via the Q&A widget. So please do put questions that may come up in the Q&A widget, and we will try to get to them at the end of the time. If you would like to enable closed captioning, you can click the CC button at the bottom of your webinar window. And we do have a Slido poll that I'll get to in just a second here. The QR code will be on that slide as well, but you can feel free just to open up the Slido on your mobile device as we speak. So you can get ready for that poll question in just a second. So that said, my name is Cliff Archie. I lead product marketing here at Grammarly for Education for education institutions and students. And I'm joined by two wonderful guests from the University of Texas at Austin. The first up is Julie Schell, Dr. Julie Schell, that is, Assistant Vice Provost of Academic Technology. So Julie, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you. Welcome. As Cliff said, my name is Julie Schell. I'm Assistant Vice Provost of Academic Technology and Director of our Office of Academic Technology here at UT Austin. And I'm also an Assistant Professor of Practice in our Department of Design and our Departments of Education, Leadership, and Policy. And as a scholar, my area of interest and focus is that I study how people learn complex topics. And I started out in getting a degree in educational psychology in the 1990s, where we were focusing on how to help teachers adopt information technology and different technologies for use in classrooms. I spent 4 years in a physics laboratory trying to understand how people learn physics, which is a really complex topic. And then I spent about 5 years in the Department of Design trying to understand how people learn design, which is also happens to be a complex topic. And over the past 2 years, I've moved focus, and now I am doing really deep dives in how people learn to adopt and use AI. And so I'm excited to be here. One of the things I've learned across this trajectory of really studying how people learn difficult things is that anyone can learn a complex topic. It just matters how the setting is set up for them to do so successfully. So I'm excited to be here and happy to hand it over to Evan, and I can share a little bit more about what our office does after that.
Yeah, good afternoon, and thank you all. Thank you, Julie. My name is Evan Daniel. I am the Academic Technology Manager for the Office of Academic Technology, or the OAT, as we affectionately refer to it as, at UT Austin. And I am delighted to be part of this discussion. I've been in higher education and education technology for the last 10 years, spread out between Texas and Washington, D.C., working in change management, student success consulting. I've been with UT for the last 2 years, and I am a Texas Ex as well and a Texas native. So yeah, hi, welcome.
Great to have you both. Julie, do you want to just touch on exactly the mission and responsibilities of the OAT team?
Absolutely. So the OAT was born just 2 years ago, and we were born through an audit. We love the university audit officers who took a look at our context and saw that there was really no governing body to oversee strategy, policy, and the adoption of technologies on campus that really came into focus during COVID. And so our office was born 2 years ago, and we are responsible for the ecosystem on campus, the academic technology ecosystem on campus. And we do oversee policy, strategy, stakeholder engagement, and the adoption of technologies in ways that really promote what we call the Longhorn learning experience, which is an experience on campus that really promotes the development of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that will help students excel in the classroom and beyond. So our office oversees I would boil that down into the responsible adoption of technologies and the full tech stack for teaching and learning on campus.
So as attendees sort of listen to Julie talk about that, hopefully become self-explanatory about why Julie and Evan are here to talk about responsible implementation of AI across the curriculum for teaching and learning. We're definitely going to get into a lot of that and the journey between the University of Texas at Austin and Grammarly over the last year in particular around that journey. But we will cover our general collaboration. We will also just get deep into UT's journey with AI and the timeline associated with that, since going back 2 years almost to the day in November of 2022 when it first hit the market in a very big way. And then we'll talk about just the implications for generative AI use across a large institution. If you are from a smaller institution, don't worry, all of those lessons will still be quite applicable to you. And then we will actually show a guide that all of you will have the opportunity to walk away with from this webinar. That is the faculty guide to Gen AI implementation that we collaborated on together, Grammarly and UT. We'll show a demo of that and then save time for any of your questions in the meantime. Now, we are going to get Julie's take on the journey that UT went on and sort of the real problem statement that they were trying to address when generative AI hit the market 2 years ago. But before we get into that, we would love to hear from all of you in this Slido. So the QR code is in the top left of the screen. But as we sit here today, almost to the end of first semester, we'd love to understand what your biggest focus is for AI adoption at your institution. If you're an individual faculty member, what kind of considerations are you making? If you're a decision maker, you may have a different purview, but I'm just curious to get the audience's general take on this question. As we wait for some of these responses to come in, Julie, I'm going to turn it over to you just to, as I mentioned, put yourself back in the shoes that you were in about 2 years ago. Take the audience through UT's initial reaction, and particularly the OAT team and academic affairs, when generative AI was really here in full force and widely available to students for the first time.
Sure. So the reversing back to that time period, we realized right away that there needed to be a pedagogical response to the release of ChatGPT. And so actually the very first thing that happened on campus is that our Center for Teaching and Learning put together a page, and you can find it online. It's called Five Things About ChatGPT. And that page was a center point for us to start communicating immediately right away and informing our faculty and our students about this tool and how it was going to be implemented on campus. So pedagogy first was in front and center for us. What I did as part of that post is I actually did a walkthrough of exactly how to log into ChatGPT and a faculty member, from a faculty member point of view, how they might use it or how students might use it to immediately emphasize the importance of experimenting with this tool and really understanding what it is at its core first as a foundation. Then that was sort of our immediate out of the gate response, but we did have to start thinking about what the university's position was going to be overall, and that's where our office really sort of came in the OAT and thinking about, well, do we ban the use of AI on campus? What kind of campus are we going to be? What is our value proposition? Or are we going to just not have any policies about this? Are we going to just kind of leave it and see where things go? And what we did right away is develop a value proposition that that really focused on all responsible access for teaching and learning. And then once we had that value proposition, things kind of flowed from there. From that value proposition, we developed a framework that we call AI Forward, AI Responsible. And that is really kind of summarizes the place that the university landed on, which is that we would be an AI forward institution when it comes to teaching and learning, but we also would be a responsible institution when it comes to teaching and learning. And we believe that there's a sweet spot between those two. If you're too AI forward and you're not thinking about the limitations of generative AI, and you're not thinking about how to protect students, faculty, and staff in light of those limitations, then you're sort of too forward. And if you're too responsible and you're just sort of cutting it out and ignoring and not using it at all, I think you're doing students and faculty and staff a disservice. So we really landed on trying to find that sweet spot between those two. And Megan, you're welcome to share our framework, our AI responsible, AI forward framework in the chat for folks there. So our first question was, do we ban it? After we had this, then we came up with our value proposition that we wanted all responsible access for teaching and learning. And then we kind of developed this framework for what that might look like. We did decide to ban something, but we did not ban generative AI, and I can leave it at that for now.
So let's dig in to this in a little bit more depth. So I think that is, a very compelling problem statement. The desire to be AI forward, AI responsible, and to toe the balance between that. But talk us through how you actually went about that, because it's not like you flip a switch and all of a sudden you're, towing the perfect line between those two things, particularly at a time in which the technology was and continues to change very rapidly. Would love to know how you actually made that goal a reality across the campus.
So one of the first things that we worked on is really understanding, I think, what responsible AI looks like for teaching and learning. And for us, that's using generative AI in a way that's aligned with learning outcomes. So that means that it's aligned to support what we want students to know, be able to do, and the attitudes that we want them to develop. And so we are an institution that's really focused on being very clear about our learning outcomes. Here in Texas, it's required by state law to have your learning outcomes on your syllabus. So for us, really like laser focusing in that responsible AI for teaching and learning means being clear about how it can be used to further learning outcomes and articulating the ways in which it could inhibit or negate the success towards developing those learning outcomes was really important for us. So that's one way we started, is just really thinking about what does it mean? What does responsible AI in the classroom look like? And having this sort of 1-0 of, does it further or does it negate the learning outcomes, and making sure that we articulate that really, really clearly to students. We also were thinking a lot about academic integrity. And so right out of the gate in the fall of that year, we released a new honor code. And that honor code really was a sort of a positive forward choice developed honor code that focuses on what students will do instead of what they wouldn't do. And we think that that's really important. So we think that the cost of policing students when it comes to the use of any tool, but particularly generative AI, and banning the use of things like generative AI on campus, and really just kind of creating an environment where we're policing students, is far greater than fostering an environment where students are able to develop their own ethical muscle or their ethical resilience and foster their own blueprints for how they're going to engage with tools like this responsibly. And I can talk a little bit more about that if it's helpful, but I'll stop there for now.
Well, I think let's ground this in some data and
Yeah,
specifically data around not just what people like yourself, like Evan, folks who work in academic affairs, who may be faculty members think and want, but also the customers that you're ultimately serving, which are students. If you look at really any sort of survey data that's out there, whether it be from McKinsey, Microsoft, Cengage, industry analysts, Inside Higher Education, some of the self-reported desires by students are kind of interesting in this regard because if you look at the employer side of things, they are saying that they want their graduates to have an understanding of, using Julie's term, ethical resilience, understanding how to leverage AI in responsible and effective ways to make them better entry-level employees. So on the demand side of things, where graduates are headed, there's clearly a growing and increasing demand for students who have, at a minimum, AI literacy, but ideally who understand how to deploy these tools and know when to deploy them and when not to. When you talk to recent graduates and you talk to students themselves, this is from a employability report from this past July, so it's a relatively recent study. 70% of recent graduates believe that basic Gen AI training should be integrated into all courses. So these are students who have recently graduated, they've moved into what is increasingly an AI connected workforce. And they are saying reflectively, this is not just something that should be taught in a computer science class or in a STEM discipline. This is something that should be taught across the curriculum and at least integrated thoughtfully into the core curriculum and the outcomes that a particular discipline may have. But the unfortunate picture is that half of recent graduates say that that did not actually happen for them, that it was not integrated into their general education studies, or they were not taught how to actually use generative AI tools during their studies. And that creates risk. That creates the likelihood that they may be deploying these tools in ways that they don't fully understand, that are not well optimized for what they're going to go do in the workforce. And so, Julie, just back to you on this point, because I think the point you raised around ethical resilience, and something I've heard you say around just um, being able to navigate ambiguity in the Gen AI
yeah.
world, particularly for students, is really important. So what's your perspective on all that, and how is that actually driving some decision making that's happening at UT?
Yeah, thanks, Cliff. So one of the things that I've landed on is that generative AI, and whether we use it or not, is it, and what it means for students' futures, is this is not the challenge of our students' lifetime. But being able to deal with ambiguity effectively and successfully, I do think, is the challenge of our students' lifetime. Those who can respond to ambiguity with resilience and creativity and critical thinking and analysis are going to be the ones that excel in their futures. Those who don't have resilience or the ability to deal with ambiguity are going to be the ones that don't do as well. So when it comes to this middle statistic about students believing AI should be integrated in the class, I want to say that what the pulse of students really, what we feel in the pulse of our students, is that they really want to know how to use it responsibly. They don't necessarily need the technical skill of how to turn it on and use it. I mean, they already know how to do that, but they expect their institutions of higher education to educate them in how to use the tools responsibly and ethically. And what we think is that students have a really strong ethical muscle when it comes to plagiarism. In fact, all of us have this ethical muscle when it comes to plagiarism. We might not always exercise it, but I would wager that everyone, 100% of the people on this call, know that if they go and they lift someone else's work and they try to pass it off as their own, that they're crossing a moral and ethical line. That's something that we're trained in. It's something that we just have this really strong, we really exercise this. We're like power lifters in that ethical resilience, in that ethical muscle. Some people might still do it, but they know that it's not right. When it comes to AI, I don't think that ethical muscle is built up. That ethical resilience is not built up. We don't know, and for students particularly, it might be what might be ethical and responsible in one class might not be ethical and responsible in another class. So I think we really need to be very aware of the need in that 70% to really be teaching our students, when should we use it? Why should we not use it? What are you offloading if you use AI to do a particular task that you really shouldn't? And we need to articulate that to our students. So that they understand and they can build up that muscle so it's just as strong as that plagiarism muscle. And I believe that it's our job as educators to teach them to do that, and even more for us to understand how can generative AI foster learning and the development of these durable skills that I mentioned, and how might it inhibit it, and to teach students to navigate that space successfully.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of really good meat in what you just said, Julie. I think just transitioning us into our collaboration, because I think it's we don't want to say that it's like an industry standard or model everyone should follow, but it is an interesting collaboration between a generative AI vendor in Grammarly and an institution that was trying to build that sense of how to navigate ambiguity on the part of students, to build ethical resilience in future graduates. And a big part of that is actually, how do you invest faculty along that journey? So, if we look at our collaboration timeline here, you touched on some of the early things that you and your team did around just like, what do we need to know about ChatGPT? What is the acceptable use policy? Talk us through just the initial touch points between Grammarly and Art and your team, and what you were looking for at the time, sort of 6 to 10 months into this journey that you were on.
Yeah, definitely. So I did a touch base about the 5 things to know about ChatGPT already. I was the chair of a committee to talk about how we might be using generative AI in design and art studio-based courses, and there were other committees around how we might support the use of generative AI or not in writing courses, and so there was a lot of that department level policy development going on at that time as well. And then the university itself launched our acceptable use policy, and that was really a center point for us, because that acceptable use policy made it really clear that we cannot use any generative AI tools that we didn't have a contract with at the university to do work that would involve non-public data. And so if you're thinking about using it in teaching and learning, one of the things about our university, which I think is really great, is that all student work is considered their copyright and their intellectual property. So the problem with using a tool that we didn't have we wouldn't have a contract with a particular vendor, is that if a faculty member or a student is putting their work into that tool, they're potentially giving away that student's copyright. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a tool that we could experiment with faculty and students with, that protected their intellectual property rights, that protected their security, that protected their privacy, and that protected their accessibility. In addition, this acceptable use policy said that there can be no contract with a vendor unless that vendor affirms that they will not train their models with our input. And that's also protecting our students' privacy, security, intellectual property rights. And so we were really out of the gate fast with this 5 things to know about ChatGPT and trying to advance our value proposition, but we did not have a tool on campus, and we did not have a contract with a tool on campus that we could scale engagement for teaching and learning that had those protections. So we were sort of at a loss and scrambling to try to find a tool that we could do some experimentation with and some projects with. And it happened that Grammarly, we came into a conversation with Grammarly, and Grammarly was already met all of our requirements for engaging with a vendor around generative AI. No training of our data with their model, already passed all of the Texas rules on security and privacy. And we were, it's not, Grammarly generative AI isn't necessarily the tool that you would think of when you're thinking of doing a generative AI project, but it was the perfect tool for us, and it was the perfect timing for us. So that's kind of how we got involved with Grammarly.
I'd be willing to bet that a lot of people attending probably still are not fully aware that Grammarly has a generative AI capability to it. And you would be forgiven for that if you're in that department. But the timing was fortuitous here because around fall of last year was when we first introduced generative into our offering, going beyond just purely a revision tool, but also a tool that you can leverage for brainstorming, for ideation, for real-time feedback, all of which are now incorporated into this guide that we're going to show in just a couple minutes here. So the timing was very right for collaboration because we wanted an institution like UT to sort of pressure test the product capabilities that we had launched and to ensure that there was a thoughtful fit in teaching and learning and not just something that was added into a product because everybody was adding in AI. We wanted it to be a meaningful contribution. And that brings us to this on-campus workshop that took place about a year ago. And then I want to bring Evan in to talk about the toolkit. But that workshop touches on something that a lot of the questions you all submitted ahead of time really grapple with, and that is how do you actually invest faculty in this journey? So Julie, shed some light for the audience on like how you all were mobilizing faculty on campus, what some of the initial pushback was, because I think it will be instructive for folks that are probably dealing with the same things at their campus today.
So one of the ways in which we're wanting to mobilize faculty is to help them adopt tools for and sort of initiatives around generative AI in the classroom that already have best practices baked into them. So, for example, having learning outcomes clearly articulated, knowing what you want students to know, be able to do, and the attitudes that you want them to develop as part of any sort of generative AI use. And so one of the things that we thought would be really helpful would be if we engaged faculty in developing lesson plans or activities for use with students and create templates for them so that we could kind of coach them through that. And then in the fall, they would be able to actually use that to teach. So instead of just like a general workshop on, hey, come learn about generative AI, which we did lots of that as well, we actually wanted to engage faculty in something that would actually help them achieve their learning outcomes and their learning goals. So that's where we sort of started driving towards making activities and making templates that they could vet and test before they used live in their classrooms. So that was our sort of starting with our on-campus workshop. And of course, we got a lot of questions about generative AI and pushback around using it in some particular disciplines. And we do defer to faculty members to articulate whether a tool should be used or not in their classroom. But what we really want to encourage all educators to do is to be really clear on why. And it's not enough just to say, I don't like it, you shouldn't use it, it's cheating. So the use of generative AI in itself is not cheating. Taking output that's been generated by generative AI, passing it off as your own and saying that you created it by yourself would be a violation of academic integrity. right? But using generative AI itself is it's not cheating. So when we just kind of make those comments, like using AI is cheating, I don't want you to use it, it's banned in my class, it doesn't help students develop that ethical muscle. And it doesn't help them develop those durable skills about, creativity, critical thinking, evaluation, and determining what's misinformation and what's disinformation, which is what we think they need. So we engage faculty by trying to create, in summary, um, uh, real practical uses of generative AI that were tested and iterated on, so that when it came time for them to teach in the fall, they had a set of activities that were built up for effective use. So I'll kind of stop there.
No, I think that's really helpful. And Evan, you've been very patient. I want to bring you in because once we had a agreement signed between Grammarly and UT, you were brought in to really implement that design work that Julie was referring to, and project managing the efforts to create tangible, usable activities and lesson plans that faculty could use on their own just to get acclimated with generative AI or start to infuse with their students. And I'm just curious, what your design principles were when you started this project. What were some of the fast learnings that you gathered when you first joined this project back in the spring?
Yeah, thank you. We approach this evaluation with the same design principles that the OAT uses in any of our technology initiatives. So three of those kind of fast learning strategies that are all practical, that I would recommend to any institution implementing or considering a technology change, are number one, design the experience with the end user in mind. So for the purposes of this pilot evaluation, we imagined how opting in and getting started might differ from the perspective of an instructor who is interacting with AI for the very first time versus what that experience might be like for a student who uses Grammarly regularly, or even for a staff member who doesn't rely on technology at all in their work, but maybe got swept up in the generative AI momentum. And using that human-centered design really helped us proactively solve future barriers and minimize the barriers that we were encountering throughout the pilot. Number two is utilizing scaffolded design. We recognize that pilot participants would be experts in their respective fields, but not everyone would necessarily be an expert in Gen AI. And so we set out to apply the work that participants knew really well to these new learning experiences, right? And we thought that we believed that this would give them more agency to be able to identify when something didn't fit with their expectations, because we were using authentic use cases and trying to build it in a way that they could adapt and apply to their everyday work or respective disciplines. And then number three is to create feedback loops. So how can we allow and empower participants to easily and quickly share feedback on their experience? And then we can take that information or those insights and iterate to continuously improve the experience for others. So that might be or that could have taken the form of our activity evaluation form that had open comment fields for the why behind a given rating or response. We created both asynchronous and synchronous opportunities to engage so that we could observe what it looks like to test these activities in a live setting. And we consulted faculty who were already using or at least planning to use Gen AI in the classroom.
And then I understand that you had way more buy-in across departments that typically do not engage with the OAT team in this project. Do you want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of momentum at UT. This is 2024 is the year of AI at UT. You all shared that we have over 3,000 plus monthly Grammarly users on the 40 acres. We had participation from a ton of different units and departments across UT, from the Texas Performing Arts to the Dell Medical School to the UT libraries. We were really excited. A lot of these participants represented new relationships that we could form, but we also wanted to leverage that existing momentum and to tap into the different committees and councils that we participate in around technology on campus that Julie referenced, where we could take a more active listening role. So I think the goal was to cast as wide a net as possible and make that open to all audiences, which might differ from maybe a more traditional research perspective, and to make them as much of a choose your own adventure as possible, right? So that way you could take that and then apply it to your classroom, or make sure that the work or the exercise fits your needs. The very first resources that we published were our template creators. So that way these use cases felt authentic and real, and could be highly specific and used over and over again, but highly specific to that classroom or to that instructor.
I was going to just pop in there that I think one of the things that also helped a lot is we know just with a larger framework with the adoption of new technologies, it's easier to adopt new things when it's compatible with other things that you're already doing. So a lot of people were already really familiar with Grammarly. And although we didn't use, we very specifically and very purposefully did not test the assistive AI in Grammarly. We were very focused on testing the generative AI within Grammarly. I think one of the things that helped with this broad interest was that Grammarly was something that people were already familiar with, and the generative AI element was the only thing that they were learning because they already knew how to use the tool itself. So kind of thinking about the scaffolding, like Evan said, thinking about our users, making these sort of things easy, but also the compatibility with an existing tool, I think was also that people like and were using on campus, was also something that was really helpful.
Yeah, I think the just meeting people where they're at is a really important design principle that I think was very well reflected in your process. But another thing I want to touch on, and then I promise we'll get into showing the actual guide, is just this notion of transactional versus transformational. This is something, Julie, you've talked about in different circuits, but it definitely is reflected in the guide itself. Can you talk just a little bit about how you think about this and how you advise faculty to think about this?
Yeah, definitely. So I think like the world of AI is just full of paradoxes right now, right? So, AI can teach you almost anything, but it can also teach you bad stuff. It can make you feel more creative, but it can also make you sound like everybody else. It can help speed up your work, but it can also make you look sloppy, right? So it's just jammed packed with all of these paradoxes, and it's kind of hard to make sense and know where to get started. So one of the things that I've done in my effort to try to think about how to help people learn to use AI, which I do think is a complex topic because of these paradoxes, I tried to break it down into these two overarching categories. One is transactional use, and the other is transformational use. And on the transactional side, this is where we sort of put in a prompt into generative AI, and that prompt is maybe pretty light. There's not a lot of human in the loop in the prompt itself, but it's sort of a one sentence question. And then, like, for example, can you help me write a cover letter for a job or something like that? And then the output comes out, and the user on the other side just adopts that output, doesn't make any changes, doesn't evaluate it, doesn't critique it, doesn't do anything. They just sort of accept it wholesale and use it. So that would be an example of transactional use. And there are some things actually where transactional use might be okay, but we don't think that the classroom is a space where transactional use is necessarily the way to go. We think that's where we want to lean into more transformational use. And the key on that is that the human is in the loop really intensely on the input stage, but also on the output stage, where you're thinking very carefully about tailoring the question and the prompt that you're putting in, And most importantly, you're really thinking about the output. You're evaluating the output for misinformation or hallucinations, um, and bad information. You're evaluating the output for um, how aligned it is with what your initial question was. And then the most important piece, and this is really my message for everyone, not just our students, but for everyone, is that AI is very seductive. So when you first start using it, you are just amazed, and it's also can be very scary, particularly when you're an educator, at the things that it can do. But the more you use it, and I say 10 to 15 hours is a little bit is about the amount of time that I think you need to use it. You will very quickly realize that it is not as good as you. It's not as experienced as you are. It doesn't have your background. It doesn't have your unique voice. And that's where the transformational part comes in. We need students and we need everyone to sort of take that output, potentially using it as a scaffold, but then transform it to make it their own. That's where we sort of want to lean.
Yeah, I think that's a great segue into actually showing the guide itself because Evan, part of the work that you led was ensuring that every activity and lesson plan had an evaluation component where the faculty members that were testing it, as well as eventually the students who were doing the activity, could do all the things that Julie touched on, even for the more transactional activities that are just faculty facing and are about optimizing their workflow. And we will show some examples of that in just a second. Um, Hopefully everybody can see my screen. You can, right? Right, Evan? Just making
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
all right, so QR code is going to go up before we end this. Everybody will get a copy of this guide, but when you do open it, you can either download it as a PDF or you can have it up in this flipping book style that we have. And just to give you just a tour of what this looks like, there are 20 distinct activities. There's also an activity template that the OAT team created so that if you, as an individual faculty member or somebody who's in instructional design at your institution, want to build from that and create your own activities, you have a really good framework to do so. And then we have 9 distinct lesson plans as well as a lesson plan template creator for the same reason, so that you all can use this yourselves. Each of these is hyperlinked. Um, Before you get into any individual activities, you can view just some background information. So we have what Julie was just talking about, the difference between transactional and transformational use. Not to say that, transactional is bad, transformational is good, but just be aware of what the distinctions are and when it makes sense to really push into that transformational use. Then we get into just the how-to. Every activity, all 20, have 5 distinct components. There's a description of the activity itself, purpose with objectives. There's a glossary that has key terms associated with that particular activity. There's a video demonstration that Evan and team recorded for every one of them, just to provide a sense of how you actually work with the generative AI tool in that activity, and then instructions to complete the step. Importantly, there's an evaluation component, as we were just talking about. That is linked here. You can fill out that, and you all, as you try it, are welcome to fill out that feedback form. It's not just an internal UT feedback form. The team welcomes all feedback from those who are testing it. You can also then check out our lesson plans. Those have specific context, duration, ideal class size, not a hard and fast rule, but just some general guidelines for what type of class you might want to use that particular lesson plan for. And then those will be linking. There will be a link in each of the descriptions to the lesson plan itself that the UT instructional team has built. Julie touched on this as well as Evan, but there's scaffolding strategies in here. And I think one of the things we didn't voice over, but that was really interesting before we launched this toolkit when we were midstream in development together, was that faculty are all over the map when it comes to their comfort level with generative AI. Some, it was their first exposure to it, and they wanted to start very, very basic. And you will see some of that in the individual activities in this guide. Others have been using generative AI since it hit the market, the early adopters, it's too basic for them. So there are scaffolding strategies recommended so that you can meet faculty where they're at. If you're really advanced, there's suggestions for how you take it up a couple notches. If you're very beginner, that some of the activities are probably best suited for you here, but all of them really accompany a wide variety of sophistication and skill levels with generative AI itself. And then we get into the individual activities. The last thing I will say before kicking it over to Evan to show us one of these in actions is that all of the examples use Grammarly's generative AI. You can do any one of these activities with a different generative AI tool if you prefer. They are agnostic, and that's what makes this guide quite powerful. But obviously, we hope that you use Grammarly with it because it's been validated through this toolkit, and it has all the capabilities built into the writing assistant that you may be used to using. Evan, do you want to take us through a quick tour of one of these activities?
Yeah, why don't we jump over to the bio sketch? I think it's number 3.
Yeah.
So for the purpose of this demo, I will very briefly summarize an activity submission from Dr. Carrie Stevens and their PhD student, Maya Blitch. Of course, I want to give a quick, just big shout out to Carrie and Maya and all of our UT participants that sourced and built these activities that ended up creating this guide. This activity in particular focuses on identifying tentative language. So the shoulda, coulda, wouldas that can surface in all types of professional writing to help the writer demonstrate more confidence and better sell their skills. Right? So this is really common for young professionals who might be called on to market the skills that are currently in development. The description and purpose here can help learners understand the how and the why behind each activity. But the evaluation questions are what really push this AI interaction into that transformative AI use that Julie touched on. So we asked UT participants, is the output accurate according to the task that you've asked Gen AI to perform? Is the intention of your original writing captured? Was it a good user experience, a bad user experience? Would you recommend Gen AI for this task? The thing about this guide is it's intended to be a starting point for instructors to define their own use cases. So an example of that in an academic writing setting could actually be the inverse of this activity. It could be, help me identify assertive or definitive language that is not supported by citation or written evidence to be able to make a more balanced argument. So there's just a lot of different ways that you can kind of take this activity, make sure that it fits your course needs, and then get started and run. And Cliff, you touched on this, but I'll note that each of these activities does contain a video demo. So if it's not connecting for whatever reason, there's a visual guide that you can follow along with to be able to see step by step.
Yeah. Super helpful. Julie, do you want to take us through one of the lesson plans that you created?
Yeah, let's go to the statement of teaching philosophy. And I think what I want to point out here is that one of the things that we really want to do is make effective teaching practices with AI as frictionless as possible. So with these lesson plan templates, we really can dig into there for a second. We use a model of effective teaching called backward design, where instead of starting off with the content that we're going to teach, what we're going to teach, how we're going to teach it, and then how we're going to test students, we start off with what our learner characteristics are, who are they, what do they need, and what are some of the things that they might be struggling with. So for me, I teach students how to write statements of teaching philosophy. I teach a class called Design Pedagogy, where they're learning how to teach design, and they have to write a statement of teaching philosophy, but they've never heard of a statement of teaching philosophy before. They've had no exposure to it. They don't have any prior knowledge for it. So in this particular lesson, that's the first thing I'm really starting to focus on, is thinking about who my students are, and then what are some of their misconceptions about that. And so one of the big misconceptions is they think it's the same as a cover letter. Then I've kind of specified what the learning outcomes are. And then I have sort of an assessment plan, and I have the actual activities down at the bottom of this, where we actually are using generative AI to help students learn and get a prior knowledge, get a foundational set of knowledge about statements of teaching philosophy. And I actually think, just kind of coming to closure on some of the comments that we've made here, we're thinking about articulating what AI should be used for and what it shouldn't be used for. I actually think developing prior knowledge is one of those places where it is okay for students to use generative AI to fill prior knowledge gaps. So when we're teaching and we're educating students, we often underestimate what the prior knowledge gaps are, and that's hard because prior knowledge is the single determinant of how students are going to do in a particular class. But when we look out across a class, we've got students who are going to be at high levels of prior knowledge, and then we've got students who are going to be really low on their prior knowledge. And what we kind of have to do as instructors is either teach to the center or actually teach a little bit to the left. With generative AI, I think we can help target filling some of that prior knowledge gap, so that we even the playing field when all of the students come in, which is what I was trying to do with this particular lesson. So as Evan and Cliff sort of also hinted at, like, these are just really good lesson plan frameworks. So part of our intent was to also, if you want to create a lesson for students that involves using generative AI, you can use these templates, and you don't even have to think about whether you're using effective pedagogy or not, because that's sort of baked into it.
Awesome. And again, there are 8 other lesson plans, and there are 19 other activities that are available in this guide. It's been shared already in the chat. We will throw up a QR code in just a second here. But before we do that, I do just want to do quick housekeeping and just say that many of you are probably familiar with Grammarly's product. If you didn't know before, now you know it has generative AI capabilities, but we are a solution for the entire institution. And so, as Julie alluded to before, we also have really enterprise-grade privacy protections in place to ensure that no data is used to train our models or our third-party partners. And if you're interested in learning more about Grammarly for Education, you can fill out this poll and just let us know if you want to speak to somebody on the team. We also have QR codes here to download the toolkit if you have not already done so. It's linked in the chat, but you can also just check it out here on a mobile device. There's more information to find out about UT and particularly the OAT team's work around the evolving use and implementation of AI for teaching and learning, generative in particular. So feel free to check out that work on the right-hand side of the screen as well. Julie also put some helpful links into the chat based on some of the questions that we were getting around honor code, around the 5 things to think about with ChatGPT. So check out those links as well. And in the 5 minutes we have until the top of the hour, let's get to some of your questions. I'm going to start by combining 2 that we received because I think they're related. I'm going to service this to you, Evan. Linda asks, I'm wondering if attitudes toward AI were measured by faculty and staff. And then a similar question from John, just how did you evaluate the effectiveness of the activities as you were building them and as you were evaluating them? So, sentiment as well as an effectiveness question around the activities themselves.
Yeah, a lot of the activities before they were kind of shared among the pilot participants or the evaluators were internally tested. So we did a lot of that work to try and make sure that it was a good user experience and that the design elements were in place and that it was going to be effective for our pilot participants. But as far as what our community looked like, we had over 100 participants across the spring and summer testing these activities. The evaluation questions that we covered are part of a survey form that we would share. And then Cliff actually joined us for some of that live in-person observation as well, to be able to watch folks go through the experience of completing testing activities and then sharing feedback. I was very, we I think developed some kind of user personas or thought about different user personas, thinking that we might get a lot of participants that were more on the AI forward side. So I've kept an open ear throughout around anybody that might be hesitant or may feel that AI is not caught up to their discipline. And we were able to, capture that through a combination of that qualitative feedback with that quantitative assessment, so we could kind of, get to larger takeaways or insights.
Yeah. And I would just say that again, a plug for as you use this, continue to provide evaluation. Like this is not a one-shot deal that only happened during the design phase. It's an ongoing evaluation process to really fine-tune this both for UT instance as well as all of yours. A really interesting question, Julie. Curious your thoughts around this one too. I'll take a first stab. Is Sarah asks, what advice do you have for faculty who are teaching composition and writing about stressing the fact that students still need the writing related skills that they'll learn in their classes? A plug for some of the webinars and toolkits that we've put out earlier in the year around the future of writing. Our philosophy as a tool that was a writing assistant before we had generative AI is that writing in the future is going to be a collaboration between AI and the human, and it is very contextual. So Julie mentioned before, like, get me started on a cover letter. That may be a case where the collaboration leans on AI a lot initially, just to get over that fear of the blank page, get over some of that analysis paralysis that may happen in one's brain, but then the end user writes to get it over the finish line and puts the personal spin on it. There will be other cases in which, particularly in a first year writing course, as an example, very little generative AI is pulled in. And it is very much on the part of the students to do the hard work of learning how to write so that you build that resilience that Julie talked about, and you're able to sort of develop your own voice and your own sense of what good writing looks like so that you can evaluate it down the line when you're looking at a generative AI output. So it's contextual. You still need the baseline skill sets in a generative AI world to make the most of those tools. That would be my take. But Julie, I'm curious what your thought is around that.
I think it's extremely critical to articulate why, what will be lost if you don't engage in the writing process in the way that the individual educator identifies. So, for example, if I have to go and give a live presentation like I'm doing right now, it doesn't make sense for me to ask ChatGPT to write a presentation for me, right? Because the task is different, right? So you need to think about, let me use a simpler analogy. If you're playing soccer and you practice all the time being a forward, and then on the day of the game, the coach tells you, oh, you're not supposed to be a forward, you're supposed to be a goalie, and you've never engaged in that, you're not going to be able to succeed at being a goalie. We need to really articulate why students need to engage in the act of writing and composition on their own and explain that to them with clarity and be clear for ourselves. And I believe, and I know because I've talked to students, that they will not offload those tasks when we clearly articulate the value to them. Sure, a small handful will, no matter what, engage in academic dishonesty, but 98% or academic conduct that we don't endorse. But 98%, if we articulate the importance and the value of engaging in that cognitive work on your own, and the losses that will happen if you don't do that, they will meet us there. And I know that from personal experience.
Now, I know we're at time. I'm gonna be selfish just because Justin just asked a question based on your response, Julie, if you have a second. Can you articulate as a counterpoint for the skeptics what is to be lost by not engaging with or using AI?
I mean, I think that some of the skill sets that we've talked about that are actually durable skills that are technology agnostic, but right now, for example, really developing that ethical resilience muscle. And knowing when we should use things and when we shouldn't use things, when we should trust information, when we shouldn't trust information, when we should be critical and skeptical, when we need to be transformational and when we need to be transactional. All of those are durable skills that students need to succeed throughout their lives. That are skills they need regardless of what future context that they're in. And I think that is a unique value that they can gain from being in higher education, particularly developing that ethical muscle and that critical thinking muscle. And so I think the danger of not engaging and like I said, I don't think it should be used for everything, but I think we need to articulate when it shouldn't be used. So the danger of not doing that is that you just you don't actually set students up to develop their own ethical frameworks for engaging.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you for our panelists taking extra time. Evan, Julie, great insight from both of you. Thank you for the collaboration on this wonderful toolkit. All attendees, thanks for sticking with us past the top of the hour. Really appreciate everybody's time, thoughtful questions, and engagement, and best of luck in the home stretch of the semester. Take care, everybody.